The thermometer on my front porch had been in my family for 3 generations, and watching Karren Whitfield from the HOA smash it with a hammer while screaming about climate propaganda was not how I expected my Tuesday morning to start. I'm Daniel Reeves, and I'd lived in the Riverside Commons development in Grand Rapids, Michigan for about 8 years. The neighborhood was nice enough: tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, and houses that all looked different enough to avoid that cookie-cutter feeling. The HOA had always been bearable until 6 months ago when Karren Whitfield got elected as president. She was exactly what you'd picture: mid-40s with that haircut, the one that screams she wants to speak to your manager. She drove a white Lexus SUV and wore oversized sunglasses even on cloudy days. The morning it happened, I was inside making coffee when I heard this rhythmic banging sound from my front porch. At first, I thought maybe the mail carrier had dropped something, but the banging continued. I opened my front door to find Karren standing there in her designer workout clothes, wielding a claw hammer and absolutely destroying my antique brass thermometer that hung beside my door. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, stepping out onto the porch in my slippers and bathrobe. Karren turned to me, her face red with exertion and something that looked like genuine anger. "This device is spreading misinformation, Daniel. The HOA board has decided that any displays promoting climate hysteria are violations of our community standards." I stared at her, then at the destroyed thermometer hanging by one screw, its glass face shattered, the mercury that had been inside now a silver puddle on my porch. "That's a thermometer. It measures temperature. It's been in my family since my grandfather bought it in 1947. It shows cold temperatures, which supports the false narrative about polar vortexes and climate change," Karren said, as if this explained everything. "We're taking a stand against fear-mongering in this community." "Are you absolutely insane?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It's January in Michigan. It's supposed to be cold. That's just science, Karren, basic science." She held up the hammer like she was making some kind of point. "The board voted 4-3 last night. Any weather monitoring devices that could be used to spread fear about weather patterns are now prohibited under Section 7 of the Community Guidelines." "Section 7 is about holiday decorations," I said, my voice rising. "I was at that meeting. You can't just make up rules and destroy people's property." Karren's eyes narrowed. "As HOA president, I have the authority to interpret the guidelines as I see fit for the betterment of the community. This thermometer was visible from the street, making it community business." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Say that again. Tell me again how you have the authority to destroy my property." She actually did. Karren looked right at my camera and repeated her reasoning, adding that I should consider myself lucky. She was only issuing a warning this time instead of a fine. Then she walked off my porch, got into her Lexus, and drove away, leaving me standing there with a destroyed family heirloom and what I was pretty sure was a criminal act captured on video. The thermometer had been beautiful. Solid brass with my grandfather's initials engraved on the back, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't find anymore. He'd bought it from a shop in Chicago after coming back from World War II. My father had it on his porch my entire childhood, and when my parents moved to Florida, he'd given it to me. It wasn't just about the money, though I knew antique brass thermometers like that one could fetch several $1,000s. It was about the memory, the connection to my family history. I called the police non-emergency line first. The dispatcher sounded skeptical when I explained what happened, but she said she'd send someone over. While I waited, I called my neighbor Tom Hensley, who lived 3 houses down and had been vocal about his dislike of Karren's HOA presidency. "She did what?" Tom said when I told him. I could hear his wife, Patricia, asking questions in the background. "Smashed it with a hammer. I've got it on video. She said it was spreading climate hysteria." "Daniel, that woman is completely unhinged. Last month she tried to fine me because my garbage cans were visible from the street for 20 minutes past pickup time. 20 minutes. She drives around with a stopwatch. Did you ever pay that fine? Hell no. I told her to take it up with my lawyer. She backed down real quick." These HOA presidents, they forget they're volunteers, not dictators. A Grand Rapids Police Department cruiser pulled up about 15 minutes later. The officer who got out was young, maybe late 20s, with a nameplate that read J. Morrison. He looked at the destroyed thermometer, listened to my explanation, and watched my video twice. "So let me get this straight," Officer Morrison said, pulling out his notepad. "The HOA president came onto your property and destroyed your thermometer because she believes it promotes climate change awareness. That's exactly what happened. She said the board voted to prohibit weather monitoring devices." He shook his head slowly. "Sir, I'm going to be honest with you. This is destruction of property, which is a misdemeanor in Michigan. Given that you have clear video evidence and she admitted to doing it, I can definitely write up a report. The value of the property is going to matter for prosecution. It's an antique. My grandfather bought it in 1947. I'd estimate it's worth at least $3,000, possibly more." Officer Morrison's eyebrows went up. "Over $1,000 makes this potentially a more serious charge. Do you have any documentation of its value?" I thought about it. "I have photos of it in family albums going back to the 50s. I can get it appraised. My father might have papers from when it was purchased, but he lives in Florida now. Get that appraisal done. For now, I'll write up the report for destruction of property. The prosecutor's office will decide whether to press charges. I'd also recommend you file a civil suit in small claims court for the replacement value." He paused, looking at the damaged thermometer. "And maybe get a security camera. If the HOA president is willing to do this in broad daylight, who knows what else might happen." That last part sent a chill through me. I hadn't thought about escalation, but Tom had mentioned Karren backed down when he threatened legal action. Would she come after me for calling the police? After Officer Morrison left, I spent the rest of the morning researching antique thermometer values and looking for appraisers. I found a place in Detroit called Heritage Antiques that specialized in vintage scientific instruments. I carefully removed what was left of the thermometer from my porch, collecting even the shattered glass and the mercury in a sealed container, and called to make an appointment. The woman who answered at Heritage Antiques was named Margaret, and when I described the thermometer, she got excited. "Brass with engraving from 1947. If it's what I think it is, those were made by Winston Instruments. They only operated for about 10 years after the war. Is the maker's mark still visible on the back?" I looked at the damaged piece. Sure enough, there was a small stamp I'd never paid much attention to. "Yes, it says Winston Instruments, Chicago. Bring it in. Even damaged, if it's authentic, we're talking about a significant value. Those are rare." I made an appointment for Thursday, 2 days away. In the meantime, I needed to figure out my next steps with the HOA. I pulled out my copy of the Riverside Commons HOA guidelines, all 47 pages of them, and started reading. Section 7 was indeed about holiday decorations. There was nothing about weather devices or climate change or any of the nonsense Karren had spouted. In fact, the only section that mentioned anything about front porch displays was Section 12, which stated that residents were allowed to have reasonable decorative items, house numbers, and functional devices such as lighting or doorbells, as long as they were maintained in good condition and not creating a nuisance. A thermometer was definitely a functional device. I took photos of the relevant sections and started drafting an email to the entire HOA board. I had all their email addresses from the community directory. My email was professional but firm. I explained what Karren had done, attached the video, cited the relevant sections of the HOA guidelines, and demanded that the board either produce documentation of this alleged vote or publicly retract Karren's claims. I also noted that I had filed a police report and would be pursuing both criminal and civil action against Karren personally for destruction of property. I sent it at 3 in the afternoon. By 5, my phone was ringing. The first call was from Sandra Yee, the HOA treasurer. "Daniel, I just saw your email. I want you to know that there was absolutely no board vote about weather devices or climate change or anything of that nature. I don't know what Karren was thinking. So she made it up. It appears so. I've been treasurer for 6 years, and I've never seen anything like this. We had a board meeting last night, but it was about approving the landscaping budget for spring. That's it. Can you put that in writing? I'm drafting an email to the full board right now. Daniel, I'm so sorry this happened. That thermometer, is it really an antique from 1947? I'm getting it appraised on Thursday." Sandra was quiet for a moment. Karren might have just created a major liability for the HOA. "If you sue, our insurance might not cover it because she was acting outside her authority." "I'm not suing the HOA, Sandra. I'm going after Karren personally. She's the one who destroyed my property." "That's good to know." "Still, as an officer of the HOA, her actions could be seen as representing us. This is a mess." The next call came from Robert Martinez, one of the board members. He was furious. "Daniel, I voted against Karren on almost everything she's proposed in the last 6 months, but she never brought up anything about thermometers or weather devices. She's been on this weird climate denial kick lately. Last month she wanted to fine people for having hybrid cars because she said they were virtue signaling. We shut that down 4-3. So there's a pattern of this. Oh yeah, she's been getting worse. I think the power went to her head. Some of us have been talking about calling a special election to remove her, but we needed a triggering event. This might be it." The third call was from Patricia Hensley, Tom's wife. "Daniel, honey, Tom and I want you to know we've got your back on this. That woman has been a nightmare. Did you know she tried to ban my garden gnomes because she said they were pagan symbols? I didn't know that. I told her where she could stick her opinions about my gnomes. This has to stop. Tom's calling everyone he knows on the board. We're going to get her out." By the time I went to bed that night, I'd received calls or messages from 11 different neighbors, all expressing support and sharing their own Karren horror stories. Apparently, she'd been on a rampage for months. She tried to ban flagpoles, regulate the color of people's mailboxes, and even attempted to require that all residents use the same garbage bag brand so the neighborhood would look uniform on trash days. Thursday morning, I drove to Detroit with my carefully packaged thermometer remains. Heritage Antiques was in a historic building in the Eastern Market District, the kind of place with creaky wooden floors and the smell of old paper and brass polish. Margaret turned out to be a woman in her 60s with glasses on a chain and an eye loop already hanging around her neck. She took the damaged thermometer to a workbench with bright lights and spent about 20 minutes examining every piece, even the broken glass. She took photos, made notes, and occasionally made small sounds of interest. Finally, she turned to me. "Mr. Reeves, what you have here, even in this damaged condition, is quite valuable. This is definitely a Winston Instruments Model 47, one of their premium residential models. The brass is high grade, the engraving is hand-done, and the mechanism, though destroyed, was mercury-based with a calibrated scale that was accurate to within half a degree. In pristine condition, this would sell for anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 to a serious collector. My stomach dropped. $4,000 to $6,000, at least. The Winston Company only operated from 1946 to 1956. Most of their production was industrial, and they only made about 500 of these residential models. They're highly sought after. Now, in its current condition, it has parts value, maybe $800. But for insurance or legal purposes, the replacement value would be the cost of finding another one in the condition yours was in before it was damaged. And that would be. I'd put it at $4,500, conservatively. I can provide you with a written appraisal for a fee of $200. That appraisal will be detailed enough to hold up in court or for insurance purposes. I paid for the appraisal. Margaret said she'd have it ready by the next day and would email me a copy with the original sent by mail. As I drove back to Grand Rapids, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was validated. The thermometer really was as valuable and special as I'd thought. On the other hand, Karren had destroyed something irreplaceable, and no amount of money would bring back the actual item my grandfather had owned. When I got home, there was a notice on my door. It was on HOA letterhead and signed by Karren. My stomach tightened as I read it. Notice of fine. Failure to maintain property in accordance with community standards. On January 14, 2025, your property was found to have broken glass and mercury contamination on the front porch, creating a hazard and eyesore. This is a violation of Section 4, subsection B of the HOA guidelines. You are hereby fined $500, payable within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in additional fines and potential legal action. I actually laughed. She was fining me for the mess she'd created by destroying my thermometer. The audacity was almost impressive. I took photos of the notice and added it to my growing file of evidence. That evening, there was an emergency HOA board meeting. I received an email about it from Sandra Yee, who noted that it was open to all residents and encouraged me to attend. The meeting was at 7 at the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was usually used for book clubs and birthday parties. I arrived at 6:55. The parking lot was packed. Apparently, word had spread, and people wanted to see what would happen. I recognized most of the faces. Tom and Patricia were there, along with probably 40 other residents. For a neighborhood of 80 homes, that was a significant turnout. The board sat at a folding table at the front of the room. Karren was in the center, looking composed and professional in a navy blazer. Sandra was to her left, looking uncomfortable. Robert Martinez was on her right, and he looked angry. The other 4 board members, Lisa Chen, Douglas Harper, Martha Finley, and James O'Connor, filled out the rest of the table. Karren called the meeting to order with a rap of a gavel. Thank you all for coming. This emergency session has been called to address recent allegations and to clarify HOA policy regarding property displays and community standards. Robert immediately cut her off. Let's be clear about why we're really here, Karren. You destroyed Daniel Reeves' property, lied about a board vote, and then had the gall to fine him for the damage you caused. This isn't about policy clarification. This is about your abuse of authority. The room erupted in applause and shouts of agreement. Karren's professional demeanor cracked slightly. I acted within my authority as HOA president to enforce community standards. The thermometer in question was promoting a political agenda. It was measuring temperature, Sandra said quietly. That's what thermometers do, Karren. They measure temperature. Exactly, Tom called out from the audience. What's next? Are we going to ban weather vanes because they acknowledge wind? More laughter and agreement from the crowd. Karren's face was getting red. This is not a joke. Our community has standards, and I won't apologize for enforcing them. I stood up. Karren, you destroyed a family heirloom worth $4,500 because you don't believe in cold weather. Then you fine me for the mess you made. I have video of you admitting to destroying my property. I have a police report. I have an appraisal from a certified antiques dealer. And now I have documentation that you lied about a board vote to justify your actions. Martha Finley spoke up. She was an older woman, probably in her 70s, who'd lived in the neighborhood since it was built. Karren, I've been on this board for 12 years. I've served with 5 different presidents. Not one of them would have done something this reckless. You've exposed the HOA to serious liability, not to mention destroyed a resident's property based on your personal political views. That's unconscionable. I move that we vote to remove Karren Whitfield as HOA president, effective immediately, Roberts said. I second the motion, Sandra added quickly. Karren's eyes went wide. You can't do that. The bylaws require a vote of the full membership. James O'Connor, who'd been quiet until now, pulled out a copy of the HOA bylaws. Actually, Karren, Article 8, Section 3 states that the board can remove an officer by a 2/3 vote if that officer has acted in a manner that creates legal liability for the association, or violated the fiduciary duty to the membership. I'd say destroying a resident's property and lying about authorization pretty clearly meets that standard. I'd like to call for the vote, Roberts said. Karren looked around the table desperately. This is a witch hunt. You're all overreacting to a simple enforcement action. Vote now, Martha said firmly. All in favor of removing Karren Whitfield as HOA president, say aye. 6 voices said aye in near unison. Only Karren remained silent. The motion passes 6-1, Roberts said. Karren, you're removed as president effective immediately. Please surrender any HOA documents, keys, or property you have in your possession. Karren stood up so fast her chair fell backward. You'll regret this, all of you. I'll sue the HOA for wrongful termination. I'll file complaints with the county. I'll make sure every one of you pays for this. She grabbed her purse and stormed out. The clubhouse was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause again. Robert banged the gavel. All right. We still need to conduct business. First order of business is to elect a new president. I nominate Sandra Yee. It was unanimous. Sandra looked overwhelmed but accepted. Her first act as president was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the HOA and to void the $500 fine Karren had issued. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Karren. Patricia Hensley gave me a hug. You did us all a favor, honey. She's been making everyone miserable. Tom shook my hand. What are you going to do about the thermometer? I filed a police report. I'm going to file a small claim suit against her personally for the replacement value. Beyond that, I just want to move on. But moving on wasn't going to be that easy. The next morning, I woke up to find my mailbox knocked over and my car keyed. Long scratches ran down both sides, with the word snitch carved into the driver's side door. I called the police again. Officer Morrison came out, along with another officer named Detective Sarah Vaughn. She was with the Property Crimes Division and had apparently been assigned to my case after Morrison's initial report. This is escalation, Detective Vaughn said, photographing the damage. Do you have any security cameras? No, but I'm getting some installed today. Good. Do you have reason to believe this was Karren Whitfield? Who else would it be? She threatened the entire board last night after they removed her as HOA president. Multiple witnesses heard it. Detective Vaughn made notes. I'll need their contact information. Mr. Reeves, I want to be straight with you. The initial destruction of the thermometer is pretty clear-cut based on your video. This, though, will need more evidence to prove she did it. Did any of your neighbors see anything? I hadn't thought to ask. I spent the next hour knocking on doors. Mrs. Chen, 2 houses down, had a doorbell camera that faced the street. She pulled up the footage for me, and there it was. Karen's white Lexus driving slowly past my house at 2:30 in the morning, stopping for about 3 minutes, then driving away. The video wasn't clear enough to show her getting out and vandalizing my property, but the timing was damning. Mrs. Chen gave Detective Vaughn permission to access the footage. Another neighbor, David Park, reported that he'd heard metal banging around 3 in the morning but had assumed it was raccoons. The auto body shop estimated the repairs to my car at $2,800. My insurance would cover it minus my $500 deductible, but I'd have to pay that out of pocket. I added it to the list of damages I was claiming against Karren. I filed the small claims suit the following Monday. In Michigan, small claims court could handle cases up to $6,000. I was claiming $4,500 for the thermometer, $500 for my insurance deductible, and $200 for the appraisal fee. $5,200 total. The court date was set for March 12, about 2 months away. In the meantime, I had the security cameras installed, 3 of them covering my front porch, driveway, and backyard. I also started parking my car in my garage instead of the driveway. Karren, it turned out, wasn't taking her removal from the HOA presidency quietly. She filed complaints with the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, claiming that the HOA board had violated open meeting laws. She sent certified letters to every board member threatening individual lawsuits. She even showed up at Sandra Yee's workplace and caused a scene, which resulted in a trespassing warning. Then, 3 weeks before our court date, Karren did something that changed everything. She created a website called Riverside Commons Truth, where she posted the names and addresses of everyone who'd supported her removal, along with bizarre accusations. She claimed I was running an illegal weather monitoring station. She said Tom Hensley was involved in organized crime. She accused Sandra Yee of embezzling HOA funds, which was completely false and easily disproven. The website was unhinged, full of conspiracy theories about climate change, government control, and neighborhood surveillance. But the part that got her in serious trouble was when she posted what she claimed were my financial records, including my bank account numbers and social security number. I found out about it when my bank called me to verify a suspicious wire transfer request. Someone had tried to transfer $8,000 out of my account. The bank caught it because the request came from an IP address in Grand Rapids, but my account had security settings that required in-person verification for transfers over $5,000. I immediately called Detective Vaughn. She told me to document everything and file a report for identity theft. When I showed her the website with my personal information posted, her expression became serious. "Mr. Reeves, this is identity theft and potentially fraud. These are felonies. I need you to print out everything from that website before she takes it down." I printed the entire site, 37 pages of crazy rants and personal information about various neighbors. Detective Vaughn took the documents and said she'd be in touch. 2 days later, at 6 in the morning, I was awakened by the sound of sirens. I looked out my window to see 2 police cars and an unmarked sedan parked in front of Karren's house, which was 4 streets over from mine. I grabbed my jacket and walked over, staying at a distance. Officers were leading Karren out of her house in handcuffs. She was screaming about her rights and government persecution. Detective Vaughn was there, along with another detective I didn't recognize. They spent about an hour inside Karren's house, eventually carrying out a computer tower, a laptop, and several boxes of documents. Later that day, Detective Vaughn called me. Karren Whitfield has been arrested and charged with multiple counts of identity theft, attempted fraud, criminal mischief, and stalking. The prosecutor's office is taking this very seriously because of the number of victims and the deliberate nature of the crimes. How many victims? Besides you, she posted personal information for 9 other residents. She also attempted to access 3 bank accounts, including yours. The fraud attempts alone carry a maximum sentence of 10 years. With the other charges, she's looking at significant prison time if convicted. I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. All this over a thermometer. It's never really about the thermometer, Mr. Reeves. People like Karren Whitfield, they can't stand being challenged. When you stood up to her and then she lost her position of authority, she spiraled. We see it sometimes with people in minor power positions. They tie their entire identity to that power, and when it's taken away, they lash out. The small claims court date became moot. Karren's attorney filed to postpone because she was dealing with the criminal charges. The judge agreed, but noted that the civil case could proceed once the criminal matter was resolved. The criminal trial was set for June. In the meantime, Karren was released on a $50,000 bond with conditions that she have no contact with anyone from Riverside Commons and that she surrender her passport. Apparently, the prosecutor was worried she might flee. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Sandra turned out to be an excellent HOA president, actually reading the guidelines before making decisions, and, imagine that, asking residents what they wanted instead of imposing her personal views. The HOA even sent me a formal apology letter and offered to pay for half of my car repairs as a gesture of goodwill, which I accepted. I found a replacement thermometer. Not an original Winston Instruments. Those were too rare, but a beautiful brass model from the 1950s that a collector in Ohio was willing to sell me for $1,800. It wasn't the same as my grandfather's, but it was still an antique with history, and it looked good hanging beside my front door. The criminal trial happened in mid-June. I had to testify about the thermometer incident and the vandalism to my car and mailbox. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Torres, built a compelling case. She had my video of Karren destroying the thermometer, the doorbell camera footage from Mrs. Chen, forensic evidence from Karren's computer showing she'd created the website and attempted the fraudulent transfers, and testimony from 8 other victims about harassment and stalking. Karren's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd had a mental breakdown due to stress, but the prosecution countered with evidence that Karren had been methodical and deliberate in her actions. She'd researched how to access bank accounts, spent weeks gathering personal information about neighbors, and carefully planned the website to cause maximum damage. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Karren guilty on all counts: 3 counts of identity theft, 3 counts of attempted fraud, 2 counts of criminal mischief for the thermometer and my car, and 9 counts of stalking. At sentencing a month later, the judge was harsh. Miss Whitfield, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust in the most egregious way possible. When faced with legitimate consequences for your actions, you escalated to criminal behavior that could have caused significant financial harm to multiple victims. This court takes such violations very seriously. Karren received a sentence of 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 4. She also had to pay restitution to all victims. My restitution was set at $7,300, covering the thermometer, my car deductible, the appraisal fee, and some of the attorney costs I'd incurred. After the sentencing, several of us victims met with Prosecutor Torres. She explained that Karren would likely serve about 5 years with good behavior, and that the restitution would be paid out of her assets, including the proceeds from the eventual sale of her house. "Will she really pay?" Tom asked. "These people always seem to avoid consequences." "In Michigan, criminal restitution is taken very seriously," Torres said. "It's part of her sentence. If she doesn't pay, she'll face additional penalties and could have her parole revoked. We'll make sure you all get what you're owed." True to her word, within 6 months, I received a check for $7,300 from the Michigan Department of Corrections Restitution Unit. Karren's house had sold quickly. Turns out property values in Riverside Commons were strong, and there was enough equity to cover restitution to all victims plus her legal fees. Life moved on. The neighborhood settled into a comfortable rhythm under Sandra's leadership. The HOA focused on actual community issues like maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and handling real problems rather than inventing fake ones. About a year after the trial, I was working in my front yard when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out, looking nervous. "Are you Daniel Reeves?" "I am. Can I help you?" "I'm Jennifer Hoffman, Karren Whitfield's daughter. I wanted to apologize for what my mother did to you and to this neighborhood. I hadn't expected this. You don't need to apologize for her actions. You didn't do anything wrong." "I know, but still. I've been dealing with her behavior my whole life. She's always been controlling and paranoid, but it got so much worse the last few years. I tried to get her help, but she refused. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in our family is like her." Jennifer looked genuinely distressed. I invited her to sit on my porch steps for a few minutes. She told me about growing up with Karren, the constant need for control, the conspiracy theories that had gotten worse with age, the way Karren had driven away most of her friends and family with her behavior. When she got elected HOA president, I knew it was going to be bad, Jennifer said. She called me constantly talking about the power she had, how she was going to clean up the neighborhood, how people needed to respect her authority. It was like the position fed every unhealthy tendency she had. "Has she accepted responsibility for what she did?" Jennifer shook her head. "She still thinks she was right. She thinks everyone conspired against her. I visit her once a month because she's my mother, but it's hard. She won't admit she did anything wrong." We talked for about an hour. Before Jennifer left, she thanked me for pressing charges. "I know that sounds weird, but she needed consequences. Real ones. She's never had to face them before, and maybe, hopefully, this will be a wake-up call." I never heard from or about Karren again after that. Jennifer sent me a card at Christmas thanking me for listening, but that was the last contact I had with anyone from that family. The new thermometer worked perfectly, accurately showing the cold Michigan winters and warm summers. Neighbors would sometimes stop and comment on it, and it became sort of a landmark. "Turn left at the house with the brass thermometer," people would say when giving directions. The HOA continued to function well. Sandra served 2 more years as president before passing the torch to Robert Martinez, who was equally sensible. The neighborhood stayed stable and pleasant. the kind of place where people looked out for each other without being intrusive. I learned some things from the whole experience. First, that standing up to bullies, even in positions of minor authority, matters. If I hadn't pushed back on that first day, Karren would have continued her reign of petty tyranny unchecked. Second, that communities are only as strong as the people who participate in them. The fact that so many neighbors showed up to that emergency HOA meeting and supported each other made all the difference. And third, that sometimes the trash takes itself out. Karren's own actions and escalating behavior led to her downfall. I didn't have to do anything except document what happened and let the system work. I kept the broken pieces of my grandfather's thermometer in a box in my closet. Every now and then, I take them out and remember him, the stories he'd told about the war, about coming home and trying to build a normal life, about choosing something as simple as a thermometer because he wanted to understand the world around him with precision and honesty. That's really what the whole thing was about, wasn't it? Understanding reality, accepting facts, measuring temperature not because of any political agenda but because temperature exists and matters. Karren couldn't accept that simple truth, and it cost her everything. The replacement thermometer hung proudly on my porch, showing the temperature accurately day after day, season after season. During one particularly cold spell in January, 3 years after the initial incident, I stood on my porch watching the mercury drop to 15 below zero. I thought about Karren somewhere in a prison cell, still probably insisting that cold weather wasn't real. I went inside, made myself coffee, and looked out the window at my peaceful neighborhood. The snow was falling softly, coating everything in white. My thermometer hung beside the door, doing its job, measuring reality 1 degree at a time. Tom walked by with his dog and waved. Patricia had her garden gnomes out, now featuring winter hats she'd knitted for them. Mrs. Chen's doorbell camera kept watch over the street. The neighborhood was full of life and character, and people being themselves without fear of arbitrary rules or petty tyrants. That night, I received an email from Sandra. The HOA board had voted unanimously to create the Daniel Reeves Community Service Award, to be given annually to a resident who stood up for the rights and dignity of the neighborhood. I was, of course, the first recipient. The award ceremony was at the spring community barbecue. Pretty much the entire neighborhood showed up. Sandra gave a speech about standing up to injustice even when it's uncomfortable. She talked about how communities need people willing to say no to unreasonable demands and yes to common sense. They gave me a plaque, which I hung in my home office. But the real gift was living in a neighborhood where people looked out for each other, where the HOA served the residents instead of the other way around, and where a thermometer was just a thermometer, measuring the temperature because that's what thermometers do. Years later, when I eventually sold the house to downsize, the new owners specifically mentioned the thermometer in their offer letter. "We love that brass thermometer on the porch," they wrote. "It gives the house character. Would you consider leaving it with the house?" I thought about it for a long time. It wasn't my grandfather's original, but it had become part of the story, part of the house's history. In the end, I left it there with a note explaining its significance and the story of what had happened. The new owners, a young couple named Michael and Lisa, sent me photos every winter of the thermometer showing various cold temperatures, along with messages like "cold weather is still real" and "no HOA Karens allowed." It became a running joke, a reminder that standing up for what's right matters, even when it seems small. Because it wasn't small. It was never about just a thermometer. It was about truth, about community, about refusing to let bullies control the narrative or destroy what matters. It was about family history and respect, and the simple act of measuring reality accurately. Karren spent her years in prison and was eventually released. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Arizona, far from Michigan winters and their inconvenient cold temperatures. I hoped she'd learned something, but I honestly didn't spend much time thinking about it. I had better things to do, a life to live, a community to be part of, and the satisfaction of knowing that when it mattered, I'd stood up and done the right thing. The thermometer might have been broken, but what it represented, honesty, accuracy, family legacy, and the courage to face reality, remained intact. And in the end, that's what mattered. Not the destruction, but the rebuilding. Not the conflict, but the resolution. Not the loss, but what we choose to preserve and protect in the face of unreasonable opposition. The neighborhood thrived. The HOA functioned properly. Justice was served. And somewhere, a brass thermometer measured the temperature accurately, doing its simple job with dignity and precision, just as my grandfather had intended all those years ago. That's the story of how Karren from the HOA broke my thermometer claiming cold weather wasn't real, and how that act of destruction cost her not just plenty, but everything. It's a story about consequences, about community, and about the importance of standing up to bullies no matter how petty their authority might seem. And every winter, when the temperature drops and the snow falls in Grand Rapids, I think about that thermometer and smile. Because cold weather is real, facts matter, and sometimes, just sometimes, justice prevails in the end.